Bam. Okay. All right. So today is college day. It's a little bit different from like regular lessons in terms of English because that's all over now. APs are done, so we are good for the school year. But I want to talk about college in all of its non-glory because a lot of people are scared of the application process, and it's not really even that scary. It really is pretty straightforward. But like a lot of things in life, they're simple but not easy in the sense that like even though it's easy to apply to a UC, it's hard to get into one, right? So a lot of people have the anxieties of that there, but past that, it's not too bad. So we're looking at 3 things today for our college talk, right? We're looking at number 1, the application procedures. How do you apply to the different types of colleges and what are the little expectations they have from one college to another? How do you apply for financial aids? I'm not really mentioning scholarships too much. I can talk about like how to do them, but otherwise I'm talking more about FAFSA because that's like universal for most people, right? And then lastly, this one applies mostly, actually largely and only to people applying to UCs and to private universities. Excuse me. Hold on, I'm choking on my saliva. I'm dying. All right. Those are the 3 things we're covering today. And each section, after we're done with them, hold on, I need some water. After each section, I'm going to kind of open the floor for questions and so forth. If you have anything that I didn't cover or like you're like, how does this work more specifically? So give me a second. Okay. So the first thing we're going to consider are just like your options, right? Your different pathways to colleges all around. And the truth is you've already been through one process of the community college at ABC, but you haven't really applied to ABC or like done some of the technical paperwork. So you pick your classes and then you get your books and so forth. It's kind of close, but it's not exactly, right? So we're going to talk about how to apply to community colleges all the way to your privates and your Ivy League schools. And I'm putting the 2 in yellow on the bottom because their application process are the same, but there's a distinction between the 2, right? In terms of like prestige or focus or whatever. So these are really the 4 things we're covering: community, CSUs, UCs, private/Ivy League schools. And this summer, if there's one task first to consider, it's just like, honestly, where do you want to go if you are going to college, right? If you don't plan to go to college immediately, then just consider maybe in the future where you might go. But otherwise, it's just a thought process because the more you dilly-dally on it, the more it's going to become a problem for future purposes. So we're going to consider the tuitions first. We're going to think about like how much it costs from one college to another. And some of these numbers look really high because they're like post or before financial aid and so forth, right? But otherwise, they're generally kind of affordable and on the general flat surface. I say that for the first 2. The latter 2 aren't very easy to fund. But if you're looking at community colleges like EBC, for example, both semesters combined would equate to roughly about $1,364, right? So that's before financial aid and all that. It's kind of affordable. Like, I know it looks like a big number right now, but once you start working and everything, you're like, okay, this sucks, but I can't afford this. It's within my ballpark range, right? And then when you start moving to your CSUs, you're looking at about $2,871. So I'm using kind of like SJSU's numbers over here, but otherwise CSUs, Cal States are universal in terms of their costs. So you're looking at that. There's a distinction though, as you go through colleges where you could be a full-time student versus a part-time student. And that option is largely only for community college/CSUs. UCs and privates generally want you to be a full-time student. So it's kind of like one cost, nothing else. But in the first 2 situations, because they acknowledge like a lot of students who attend community colleges and CSUs are working part-time or full-time even. And so in this case, they can't really do a full load in a particular semester or whatever, right? So in this case, there are 2 different costs. If you are going for 6.1 plus units, you're looking at $2,871. But if you are taking only 6 units, which is about 2 classes tops, then you're looking at about $1,665. So it's really like, you're pick and choose in terms of what your workload is. UCs is where you see your first big bump. So UCs in terms of 1 year is 12,570. So in this case here, that is a large number compared to the previous 2. And even though it does cover like both semesters, it's still a pretty extensive fee. But remember, we're going to talk about FAFSA and stuff like that. So in this case, the big numbers are things to just like, get a visual of, but we'll learn how to tackle those as well. And if you apply to private universities, they're usually really expensive, right? Because you're basically paying on everything on your own kind of wallet. Looking up these 3, they receive mostly like state funding and everything like that, so they can kind of look at some of the cost and also like in a way like copay for you, but when you're looking at privates, it's like entirely on you. So you're paying like a full package deal in this case. That's why it's so heavy for tuitions here. And then if you're looking at this cost over here, this is Stanford's 18482, so it's pretty high. Along with you applying to your colleges in the future, also think about like what you're able to access. And if you do, let's say you're struggling with finances and everything like that, but you still want to attend a UC, for example, then it's time to think about applying for financial aid scholarships and everything like that early on, right? So with that in mind, we're going to consider your community college process. And I'm starting with this because their application process is very similar throughout from this point on. I can throw a couple of names out here, starting from Evergreen all the way to San Jose State College, because even though there's a bunch of community colleges around the Bay Area, these are the ones that are most commonly gone to, and I guess a little bit more notable and I guess trustworthy for the most part here. So from these colleges, you're definitely free to pick and choose which ones best apply to you in terms of like distance or campus culture or whatever, but otherwise these are ones that people usually subscribe to. Doesn't mean they're only ones, but otherwise if you're going to community college, these are probably the choices that you want to consider in mind. Now usually community colleges have very foundational requirements, so it's kind of like everyone will ask for these at least, but then later as you go on to like CSUs and UCs, they're going to add more and more to them, right? But in general, all you need are these factors. One, you need to be 18 of years of older. You need to have a high school graduate diploma. You need to pass California proficiency examination. So this one here is kind of tricky because this is kind of waived for you guys. Every school has their own sort of like testing in terms of like math and English. And so you being able to like pass that for the most part guarantees that you're proficient, but otherwise I don't think I could take it this year. So in this case, don't worry about this one for the most part here. And then lastly, if you have other means of attending community college, it's either through a GED or if you are under 18, then your school accepts you. Kind of like right now, right? Like right now you're officially approved by a high school district. So in this case, it's actually pretty basic in terms of its requirements. Like really, it's 100% admission rate for community colleges for the most part, as long as you kind of like have all the paperwork and all that there. So there's no worries in applying to community colleges. So we'll look at EVC as an example because even though like other community colleges have their own sort of requirements and everything like that, EVC and all of them combined are pretty similar in terms of their requirements. So you're going to go into the websites depending on which one you're applying to, right? And you're going to provide pretty much some basic questionnaire stuff. So anything from like your full name going down to social security number. You're going to get this a lot. Like by the end of your college career, you're probably going to memorize your social security number. Like that's how much you use it later on. Even today, like it just comes subconsciously, kind of like a school ID. Like you just don't forget it for some reason. But otherwise, they're going to ask you a bunch of stuff to fill out on forms and stuff like that. And then later, for a lot of community colleges and CSUs as well, they're going to ask you for services, meaning that they're going to ask, hey, we probably know that you're working and you have like issues and struggles in life. So if you need some services to kind of provide for you, what are they? And I have this list over here that I got from their website. In terms of if you need financial aid assistance, things that they can direct you to. If you need like childcare services, they can kind of like help provide and so forth. So these first two, CSUs and community colleges, they are for, if I had to categorize it, a lot of like working class people, right? People who want an education, higher education, but it's just tough because there's so much going around with them. So in this case, I will say this before we go on as a sort of comparison. People who usually attend UCs and private schools usually have a little bit more privilege and a little bit more luxuries in life. So in this case, they kind of like expect you to put everything into education because it's kind of like, well, we know you can afford it, everything. So, you know, get on it, right? But for community colleges and CSUs, you're kind of like, hey, we get that you might not be financially stable. So we're going to provide a lot of stuff that's possibly helpful for you. So, you know, a little kindness in the education world, sort of. Now, here's the deal. A lot of people do online submissions for the most part, but if you want to do a physical form, that's absolutely fine as well, right? It's entirely up to you in terms of like how you want to apply for it. Just one you're going to have to physically drop off, the other one you're just going to make an account, and then boom, you're good for the most part here. So in this case, online or physical, both fine, and they're actually pretty intuitive. Like this form, for example, is the physical one. It's only about like 2 pages tops. So once you fill everything in, you submit it, you're pretty much good for community college. Like they're going to ask you for a few more paperwork and all that, but that's it. You're going to turn a few items in, and then later, once you're accepted, you're accepted. Um, this is kind of the same thing, even though we're going to talk about this later for UCs and stuff like that. They don't really have this, but otherwise, every school is going to tell you like what a full-time student is, what a half-time student is in terms of how many units are. Now, if you look at this one, it's a little bit different from the SJSU one I showed earlier, where a full-time student has to have 12 or more units, but a half-time student, even if you have 11 units, you're still considered half-time. And this is the trickiness of a lot of colleges, where they want you to pay more for less. So in this case, 11 units technically is what I think they're 3 units each, right? So in this case, you're taking maybe like 3 full classes and a PE class. So that would be like 10 units for the most part. And that hasn't met the requirements for a full-time student. So you're paying half-time student price, but you're not taking the full load basically. And this becomes an issue in this way, where if you're paying for full time, it does cost more anyways, right? But it's like more bang for your buck because you're actually like getting the most out of it. But even if I took like 6 units versus 11 units, I'm paying the same. So it's kind of like this discrepancy where you better make sure you have 12. So in different schools, you want to make sure that you're taking whatever is the full time or half time, like best fitting to your graduation plan, your situation, but also like how much you want to pay and can't pay, right? So it's like a money game and strategy game you're playing with yourself too, in terms of school applications. Now, when it comes to these fees though, they will usually kind of give you a list in terms of how much things cost. So you want to be careful with looking at costs for colleges, because even though we have these big ass numbers on the bottom over here, they're usually not that large, because there's things that they include that you might not be affording in here, or things that are really subjective from household to household, right? So the only 2 things you want to look for in colleges are these 2 categories here, like your fees, basically enrollment, and whatever extra stuff they're going to add on to it, but also, excuse me, your books and supplies. So you'll notice that this is actually a way bigger in terms of cost, because again, college textbooks are pretty damn expensive, but they also put in supplies. So it's not even that much. Supplies can be anything from even a computer, for example, a laptop that you're using from a day-to-day basis, or just anything that you're putting into a class. So if really you're looking at these lists, even cross out the second row sometimes and just look at the tuition, because everything here is really dependent on who you are as a person and how much you need to spend and everything like that. So tuitions, boom, there you go. Every school has an orientation. This is the annoying part, but also the mandatory part. So once you're actually like signed up for EBC, for example, right, or any of the colleges I'm going to mention in a second here, they're going to expect you to go to orientation. And you're basically going to walk around and just learn about the school, kind of do some paperwork, do your ID cards. If you think about that one boring ass day we went to EBC to do ID cards and stuff like that, that's pretty much what an orientation is, where your guide is going to just kind of finish the technicalities with you, and then that was it. Like for my orientation, it was like 15 people per group. You tour around the school. Your group leader kind of helps answer questions, and then later you also do things like sign up for your first schedule. And that was kind of scary because I know nothing about college at the time, right? So they're basically like, here's computer, sign up for your classes. And I was like, oh shit, what do you do? And they're like, here are some items you should take. And so really, even though a lot of things are guided for you, they're going to kind of throw you into the scene and hope that you swim and not sink. But otherwise, when you're doing orientation, it's really a 1-day process tops. Some schools make you do overnight stay. So I know SJSU did that. I don't know if they do that anymore, especially with social distancing, but otherwise you'll go there for a full day. You'll kind of dorm in there for one night and then later finish whatever you need to do in the morning there. So orientation is mandatory for a lot of schools. If you don't do orientation, you usually have to make it up in some way. So don't miss it. Otherwise it might mess up not your admissions, but your scheduling, which I'll talk in a second. So you're going to pick courses and your major, ideally, when you start applying for colleges. So if there's a second task besides like just thinking about what college you want to apply to and everything like that, start thinking about what majors interest you. And I say majors plural because, again, you're going to be even more deciding in your senior year of high school, and you're also going to be more deciding in even your college experience. Like a lot of people are undecided for their first 2 years even. Just kind of wandering around doing their GEs and thinking about which major interests them or what is most compelling to them, right? So in this case, orientation will lead to this, where they're going to have you pick your preliminary courses. So for me, it was kind of like You sit down, you pick your 4 classes, and usually most schools require you to take an English and a math class because it's kind of like the basics all around, right? So they're going to have you do what you're missing. So if you pass AP Lang, for example, and you're applying to a community college or a CSU, then you would knock out, I want to say it's English 1B. And it's weird, I know, because you're thinking like, wouldn't it go in order like 1A? And the reason is 1B is like composition, arguments, and that's what Lang is. So in this case, you would knock out 1B. You're still taking 1A because it's like a freshman comp course, but then you don't have to like take 1B in the subsequent semesters. So like I mentioned earlier, you don't have to pick your course or your major, rather pick your courses, but you don't have to pick your major for roughly the first 2 years. That's tops though. Like you want to be careful with this because even though I'm saying that you don't have to pick your major in the first 2 years, a lot of majors are kind of like, no, we want you if you know what you're doing from the get-go. And that includes a lot of like engineering majors or a lot of like medical majors where if you are undeclared for maybe like 2 years and then you suddenly want to become that major afterwards, they're going to be like, your commitment level's a little bit shaky though. I don't really think you have the good ethos for this case. So a lot of majors, we'll talk about that in a second, do want you to, pick early. Now keep in mind this, where it's not all random though. They're going to give you like a guide in terms of what classes you take. It's like A through G basically, right? Your GEs are to kind of take whatever you need per category. So for SJSU, use that as a reference because that's where I went, right? They're going to give you like lists in terms of here are classes under A, classes under B, classes under C, and for each category you kind of fulfill the units required. So in this case, you're basically just kind of like finishing. You have choice though, because there's like different options under A, B, and C, but otherwise you just gotta finish all those before you go into your major classes. Last thing before we go past this slide, I mentioned this earlier in terms of like you want to make sure you pick early. Some majors are impacted. What that means is some majors are, how to explain this, limited. So let's take nursing is usually impacted. Impacted means that there are way more people who want to apply for it versus how many spots are available in the major. So let's just kind of use some numbers as an example, right? Let's say there's 100 spots right now for the nursing department, but there's like 200 people who want to apply. That's impacted because not like, like CS, for example. Not everyone can make it. And so in this case, you have to really know that 1, that's your major you want to take. 2, you're kind of building a plan towards that. And 3, you're competitive, that in college, but also a little bit in high school, your grades are showing that you are going to succeed. Because if they only have 100 spots and there's 200 people and you join, but you're slacking the whole time, then you basically wasted a spot for one person who could have done a lot of, more than that. Can you major for CSGO? Okay, I'm going to give kind of a half troll answer, but it's actually legit. There are some gaming schools now under private colleges. And so in this case, they're going to kind of like put as a major competitive gaming. But I'm also going to put the disclaimer that a lot of those are usually cash grab schools. So they're going to actually manipulate you for your money. So you're going to pay a lot of money thinking you're going to go into something, but it's not so hot, basically. Now, every school has a pacing guide, and I'm using SJSU. Even though we're talking about community colleges still, I'm going to use SJSU as an example because it was like the most readily available one that I had personally. But otherwise, every school is going to have something like this, right? So I'm going to go back to between these 2 slides where they give you the entire list of all these different categories. And you'll notice that like they have a category called University Graduation Requirements, Core, Lower Division, General Ed. So these are all your GEs, right? But underneath your GEs, you want to make sure you take upper division general education. So I'll talk about that in a second for CSUs, but there are distinctions between GEs. But you want to make sure that you take these classes. You're going to take a history class. Unless you pass APUSH, then you're good in that case there. You got to take physical education again. You got to take a usually foreign language and so forth and so on, right? But basically, you just follow their guide over here. You make sure you have all the credits on the side. They give you like the numbers of units and everything like that. Bold is the overall ones, and then later underneath are your options and so forth. And then later, once you meet your unit count, then you're good. So looking at English, for example, there are 120 units, right? But I just can't do randomly 120 units. I had to make sure that units came from these categories combined. So as per your major, talk to your counselor when you first go into your colleges and everything like that. They'll give you a list like this where it basically provides a roadmap of how to graduate on time. You're not stuck doing just like, 1 or 2 classes though. Like if you look at this category where it's like additional requirements, I need 15 units here, right? But of the 15 units, I can pick and choose from these categories here. So you can have a little bit of pick and choose, but there is kind of a general pathway depending on what major you choose so far. Now, these are the final steps. I know I talked about a lot so far, but in short, it really boils down to 4 steps. Number 1, you're just registering for account, you make an account, and then you become admitted. You attend orientation, you pick and you consider a major, and then you register your classes, and then you kind of follow your pacing guide. That's it. Like everything I just covered, this is kind of like the big summary, right? So in this case, just consider that where community college is actually pretty simple. It's just that in between the steps, there's a little bit of nuance and so forth. Muhammad, you're asking how much a unit normally costs. That's really dependent on colleges in general. So every college, depending on their overall tuition price, is going to kind of divide that by how much it is, right? So I want to say I'll take UCs as an example. 1 unit would be like maybe like $700-800 ish, right? So combined, 1 class would be like $2K ish, sort of something like that, around that ballpark. Maybe like 1,700 to like 2K ish. But otherwise, it varies from college to college. So here are a couple final thoughts on community college, and I'll provide these per section, right? The final thoughts are, a lot of times when you're going to community college, you're not actually going for a bachelor's degree, you're going for your associates. Associates is a 2-year degree where you're focusing on a topic generally. So let's say you're going into like car mechanic degree in that, right? So you have an associate's degree in that. And with that, you can kind of apply to specific jobs and so forth. The nice thing about a bachelor's that you get in your CSUs, your UCs, and everything like that, those are usually for like a broader array of jobs. So a lot of jobs will not take associates, for example, but most jobs will take a bachelor's in this case. So community colleges does have its limitations in that field, but if you really know what you want to do and that job only requires an associate's, then boom, go take the community college, right? Even that being said, community colleges are starting to offer bachelor's now in different categories. So there's that as well. As mentioned over here. At the same time, community colleges are also kind of like places where people kind of do their 2 years for their GEs and they move on to universities. This is a totally legitimate move, and it is really a smart move on your wallet, right? Because if you saw those numbers earlier in terms of like how much it costs for those even CSUs, but like UCs and private schools, then later just taking care of your GEs for like pretty much 1/10 of the cost is a really smart move. So in this case, if you want to do that for community colleges, then go ahead, right? You're not really missing out on anything besides maybe like familiarity, culture campus, stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like more of the side stuff. So not detrimental altogether. And at the same time, community colleges are like inexpensive compared to higher options, so or other options. But with that, like as I mentioned, there are like limitations, right, with your associates and all that there. So just food for thought as you ponder community colleges as an option. Oh, one last thing, I didn't mention this here. Let me just type that real quick then. Just be careful, not all classes transfer to CSUs, UCs, etc. So what I mean by that is those classes that you're taking at EVC, some of them will transfer into colleges in the future that you might transfer into, like your CSUs and UCs, but not all of them do. So you want to make sure you go into the websites per school that you're applying for and seeing which ones directly transfer. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're taking I don't know, just intro to theater. This is an example, right? And that would be like an English elective. But the problem is, let's say you're applying to Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara doesn't recognize that class as an accepted one. So even though you took that class in EVC and you want to transfer over as credits, they wouldn't do that because it's not accepted in their list. So you want to make sure that as you're doing your GEs in community colleges, you want to take the ones that associate to whatever school you might be branching off into. Food for thought. All right, so CSUs, I'm just going to go by really quickly because a lot of the requirements are similar to some nuances here and there. So YB does have its sort of like acceptance to SGSU, for example, in terms of that promise, right? As long as you have your grades maintained, everything like that. But as a whole, CSUs have these general requirements that are a little bit different from your community colleges. Number one, you want to make sure you're completing your high school courses with grades of C- or better. So this is actually what we call like the A through G requirements, right? In terms of not just passing, but also passing with like acceptable grades. They're also going to ask you to submit SAT or SAT scores. Now, this is actually where it gets a little tricky this year, because I think SATs and ACTs are canceled in UCs. Oh, no, they are for states, I think. I think for states they're also canceled in terms of like an absolute requirement, but they also help you stand out as a candidate if you want to. So in this case, SAT or SAT scores are optional at this point. And then later, they also kind of consider your GPA in terms of high school, just kind of see like how you did. So if your GPA is a little bit on the lesser side, that would be an issue. And that's why SATs do help, because if your SAT scores are pretty decent and your GPA was kind of low, then they think like, oh, maybe you slacked some classes, but otherwise you're, on top of your game for content knowledge, right? This is not something to consider too much because it's an average, but the average GPA admittance for say SJSU, for example, is 3.45. But otherwise, in general, as long as it's 3.0, then you're kind of okay in terms of applications, right? The acceptance rate might become a little lower for that, but otherwise, 3.45 is kind of like a nice number to consider. It's kind of like an absolute almost, but 3 is good in its own terms to apply here. That's why like SAT and ACT are there to balance, because if you have that on the side, it adds to your application and you kind of stand out then to, get that position. So as an overview, these are things that they require you to have as a student as you're applying. So you meet all the requirements, you're choosing a major like the community college situation, you're applying to the CSU colleges either online or paper. You can pick more than one, obviously. They give you an ID once you sign up in your email, and you're going to basically kind of like use that to make your school account and use your school account to check and see if you've been admitted and everything like that. So it's kind of like a two-step process, right? You keep checking your account for the next steps and everything like that. You submit SATs, and then you graduate from high school for roughly like better than C- for the most part altogether. So really, this is all you got to do for your CSUs. I know I went through like, a lot of things prior, but just like the community colleges, it's pretty simple in terms of all the things you should be doing and need to be doing. After this point, all you're just doing is waiting for an admittance, just waiting for them to say, hey, you made it to our school. There are some smaller side things that aren't like big deals, but they do kind of come up as you're going along though. When you are chosen to the school, let's say you're being admitted to SJSU, for example, right? Then you basically have to say, yes, I am going here. And that basically is your verification and your commitment to the school. At that point, they're going to ask you for your transcripts, your paying fees, and everything like that. Go to orientation. I know, same thing as before. You had to pay a deposit because it's kind of like you are kind of adding into the investment, just making sure that you are going to commit yourself to it. It's like a $100 deposit or something like that. It's not like a big deal, but well, maybe it is. But so it's kind of like a smaller annoyance, another thorn in the road. You're going to find this a lot in college. You're going to find a lot of like random things that just keep picking at you. But that's a later story, right? You pay your tuition, you pick your classes again, usually math and English are required, and then you later, oh, this is a big one, make sure you have your shots. You gotta make sure you have your TB shots done. So if you, especially in this time period when like health is a really big topic and issue, if you don't have your shots, then you're not going to be accepted. So make sure you take your TB test and everything like that soon, and also prior to applications and all that there. Okay, so some final thoughts for CSUs in terms of like the comparisons between this one with community colleges. Someone just sent me a private message. They thought like alcohol shot. No alcohol shots. That's when you're in college, not before you're in college. Okay, so some final thoughts in terms of CSUs. The benefits, again, with a bachelor's degree is just that you can access more jobs and stuff like that. So really just kind of broadens your horizons for what you can do afterwards. But at the same time, a lot of campuses have specific programs once you start going to your CSUs and UCs and stuff like that into steady paths of careers. I'll give you a really weird example about SJSU. So if you ever watched like a Disney or Pixar movie actually, and you see those names at the credits for animators, a lot of them actually came from SJSU. And SJSU has actually been scouted constantly by Disney and Pixar and so forth, because they know that that department, that program is pretty competitive for animators and so forth. So it's kind of weird that every school has their own sort of like niche that you might be applying for, right? Other things at SJSU, for example, it has a pretty good nursing program. It's a credential program. It's funny because of all the CSUs and UCs, there's only like 4 schools that kind of give teaching credentials, and SJSU is one of them. So in this case, they offer a lot of different things that you might be kind of applying for a job later on. Now, UCs are where they get a little bit more technical, right? You can kind of notice that as you go up the sort of ladder here, there's more bullshit they make you do. So in this case, same old, right? A lot of things they're going to ask you for. Transcripts, test scores, SATs, and like APs, again, they're like pretty much optional. APs can only help you at this point, right? They're going to ask you for things like annual income, for example. So this is more for scholarships and also for like financial aid, but otherwise they're going to ask you at the get-go your annual income. They're going to ask you for, again, your social security number, citizen status, an ID, a California statewide student ID. That's optional because that's usually on your transcript, but otherwise it's like, if you have it, cool. If you don't, whatever. Credit card, they're going to ask you to pay pretty quickly for UCs and so forth. I'm going to guarantee you guys, school, especially colleges, is usually a market. It's nice to like have an education, everything like that, but it's really like, it's an investment for a better paying job and stuff like that. So sadly, a lot of it's going to be like, pay me now and hope you do well later. Someone just asked me earlier privately on chat how SCSU's engineering program. It's good. It's good. I will say though, you're going to hear a lot of complaints for that department. So the problem is they have actual engineers teaching you. The problem is they're actual engineers and they have an engineering job that they're more focused on than teaching. So if you're like, hey, professor, the project was assigned in September and now we are in December. Are you going to grade it? He's going to be like, yeah, kid, we have a project in my job right now, so fuck off. So just saying, the engineering department has a lot of issues in that regards. And then later one person asked, is it better to take SATs and then resubmit? Yeah, for sure. Like if you think that's going to help you with grades and everything like that, it's a thought. You know, it's not going to like, you know, be a requirement for the most part. So maybe put that out of your consciousness, but otherwise, you know, the next 4 years will be interesting in terms of what colleges do or don't do with SATs. So the application, like I mentioned, kind of includes some things that are a little bit different from the previous ones. So they're going to ask you for all the UC campuses / major you're going to apply for. They're going to ask you for your academic history. So everything from your APs to honor classes that you may have taken to whatever, anything that kind of like designates your academic history for schooling and everything like that. They're going to ask you for your test scores, activities and awards, scholarships, if you want to apply for them. So they're going to ask you for a little bit more personal information, right? And speaking of personal, they're going to ask you for the personal insight questions. So we'll get to that very end, but otherwise, oh man, this is the fun part about applying for UCs. You got to write a lot of revisional essays that basically talk about yourself. So it's almost like cover letters to apply for a job in a sense, but you're basically telling a story about yourself. So it's really absurd and kind of bizarre. But I'll show you some student samples of ones that succeeded in the past, but also just kind of like, you know, what they're looking for personal essay questions. They give you a bunch of little like items that kind of, you know, check off, but otherwise, these are all things that help consider them in terms of picking you as a candidate. So they're going to consider things like your GPA. They're going to consider things like your SAT scores. Again, that's more optionals and stuff like that. They're going to consider your senior year kind of performance and junior year. So junior year and senior year are the ones they're going to look at most for your kind of like performance and everything like that. They're going to ask you for like talent. So really there's like a checklist of all these things that add onto your resume here. Your biggest challenge in your applications to UCs is you got to stand out. You got to make sure that you're looking as someone that's willing to perform more and someone willing to kind of do more, right? So one person asked, is it only UC that do PIQs? Yep. Private schools do something called Common App, which is similar, but otherwise community colleges and states don't ask for that. And then another person asks, special talents, what are those? Well, basically it's anything from like hobbies to even extracurriculars that you have pursued more into, like music, for example. Like if you are able to do an instrument, but maybe have even performed with it or applied it, then those are your talents that they would like to know about too, because they like more well-rounded people, right? People who are like aren't just, I do this one thing in my life and that's it. And it's kind of like, brother, you're kind of a square, you know? So they kind of want you to be more diverse. Now, our last one I'm going to go by pretty quickly because, again, it's very similar to other ones, right? Private and Ivy Leagues. And I haven't talked about like my final thoughts because I'm going to combine them with the UCs, but the website is over here in terms of how to apply for Common Apps. It's actually super simple because there's so many schools under the Common App things. But otherwise, once you log into your Common App account, you can apply to as many schools as you like, but every school is going to ask for something a little bit different. Regardless, though, they're going to ask you to have these things on hand. transcript, activities, work, family responsibilities, test scores, your parents' information, basically a lot of things they ask you in the previous sectors, right? So whatever they ask you to have, just make sure you have it on hand. Most schools are going to ask you for Social Security and parents' financial status. So that's also for FAFSA, we're going to talk about in a second here, but otherwise just have those two things ready during the summer or also in your senior year. Now, this is the difference for college or common applications, yeah, compared to like UCs and stuff. Every private college is applied the same way, but every private college is going to ask you for something a little bit different. And that's the annoying part, because one college will be like, hey, turn in your Common App essay. And you're like, cool, easy, I'm done. Another college would be like, hey, turn in your Common App essay as well as 3 different essays we're asking you for. It's like, okay, fine. Another college will be like, I would like you to have this paperwork as well. Like, what? Why? So every college is going to ask you for something very different, but at the same time, it's all on screen. It's all going to be directly in front of you. So basically just follow from like step A to whatever, right? And even though they do ask for different items, it's not like hidden. Everything is very accessible. Just make sure you get it, whatever they're asking for. Someone asked, to get into private college, do I need to donate $25 million? You don't have to, but it helps a lot if you can donate $25 million. So just saying, get those checkbooks open and start donating money. Now, these are my final thoughts on UCs and privates. Let me give you the dark, dark truth about education. Ready for this? All right, drum roll. You would only really apply for UCs and privates, one, for a higher education. Sure, that's kind of like the surface level stuff, right? But when you're applying for UCs and privates, it's more about contacts. Because if you think about who is on a UC in a private school, like a Harvard or whatever, you really look around people with a lot of opportunities. You're looking at people who have access to internships, people with connections from family or peers, whatever. So this is a place really to, if you want to like do it big, right? It's a place where you can kind of like throw your resume around and kind of like get your name out there. So this is a place where you can kind of jump into affluency because you're having your foot in the door for a lot of places there. So in this case, that's kind of the benefits of UCs and privates. They usually have a lot of good connections to people in the higher fields of money making and so forth. At the same time, they also have a lot of good opportunities for jobs and internships. So in this case, a lot of professors will kind of like push you in that direction, but they'll kind of like notify you. Things that are like even campus specific, like let's say Davis will have like a business specific internship program with X company. So in this case, they have even like some pathways to certain places that will be looking for students in the next semester or whatever. This is also something that's really different from UCs compared to like CSUs and community colleges. A lot of their classes are going to be like very heavily research-based. So in this case, your classes aren't necessarily just going to be like writing an essay here and there. They're going to ask you to write like very extensive research papers and so forth. So in this case, they're going to be really hands-off. Sometimes you're going to be like, whoa, why is my professor kind of like not lax, but they're kind of like minimal with me, right? Because they're going to expect a lot more from you to do research and so forth. So in this case, UCs and private schools really, they put a lot of pressure on you in the sense that a lot of the work is on your hand. And then later, lastly, it's a pro and con competitive culture, right? If you're on UCs and privates, they're going to be situations where you think like, you are a friend to me, but you're also a competitor to me. So in this case, I'm thinking of you not so much as a friend, but more as an obstacle to my job in the future. So just thinking like that. If you buy a building, someone's asking here, if you're buying a building to Stanford, does it make an automatic admission? Again, it's not necessarily the case, but it helps a lot. And another question is, if a family member is in a UC and I reach out to them for tips, would it make the process easier? I wouldn't, you know what? I mean, like it's a soft yes, because yeah, like for sure, like why wouldn't they have, tips and stuff like that, right? But I think at a certain point, their tips are going to be very specific to their major as well, because every major is also very like dependent on that person's experience and also the classes they take and so forth. So what I'm giving you here is kind of like how you apply to it, but anything past this here is going to be entirely up to you. And for that family member that's in the UC right now, their experience is also going to differ from you. Like they're going to tell you the same things for the most part. Work on your PIQs, get good grades, right? So the preliminary requirements are going to be the same, but anything past that is kind of on the subjective level. At this point, let me open the floor for any questions that people want to ask me, either in chat or verbally here. We'll take a few minutes here to consider, and then we'll move on to FAFSA, and later we'll jump into PIQs. Any questions thus far on applications in the process of? And for anonymous person, the rowing team to impact your college admittance, maybe for private schools, maybe for Ivy League. And yes, for another person here, there is a lot, but I'm trying to like kind of make it conscious in terms of like what is being required. But even then, right, like even though I went through a lot, once you pick your path, right, let's say you're applying for like a CSU, then you're only focusing on that one pathway. So it's not that tricky. Just consider that there is a lot of paperwork to do. Well, if you want to apply for all of them, then yeah, there'll be a lot of different requirements. So that's why start early. That's why I'm doing this right now in May, because there are a lot of people in fall who are going to ask the same questions and haven't started yet, like the last senior group and every senior group I've ever had, who are going to be like, how do I do applications? And I'm like, brother, it's mid-October. You know, you got like a month maybe, but even then. Would creating a dating website for the college make you, would it count? No. Should we buy books or rent? That's a good question. I would say this: renting is usually the best path of saving money for your wallet. Torrenting, pirating, yeah, that helps too. You know, I've done that too. I won't tell you where I got them because they're probably all taken down now. But otherwise, it's however cheap way you can get your books. You can keep your books if you want to, you know, keep them for the sake. Like actually, I kept most of my books because they were pretty inexpensive. They just make you buy a shit ton as an English major because it's kind of like, for this semester we are reading 10 novels, and you're like, okay, so yeah, I just kept all those novels. But it's up to you. What colleges in your opinion has the best nursing programs? Nursing program. So SJSU has a good one. Stanford has a good one. Yeah, so this person's adding on UCLA has a good one. UCI has a good one. So there are different colleges that do offer a pretty competitive and strong nursing program. And those are, again, going to probably be impacted. So just keep that in mind, that even though you're applying for the best one, you're also going to consider having to look that up. Another person's asking about public health. I don't really know all those, because it shifts. Every school will shift a little bit in terms of its culture too. Like Davis, for example, is known for business oftentimes, but that also is not exclusive to Davis. Like it shifts around to like Santa Barbara or who else is good for business? Losing my train of thought. Santa Barbara is a big one there. So again, it does like change as the years go by. So you might have to look into that yourself because it does have like a big web here. Another question here, can you talk about teacher recommendations independent for each college? Oh yeah, for sure. Like there are some really great professors you're going to get in college, and they're going to be some terrible ass ones that you have experienced already in EDC. You know what I mean? Like it's a crapshoot that you're going to have to like learn from word of mouth and just looking online. So they do have like rate your professor and stuff like that, but even that's like not super reliable, right? Like for me, I can give you names of English professors at just specifically SJSU, but again, it's super varied, and you just want to pick person that, you know, most people have positive experiences with. You know what I mean? Like that's all I can say, sadly. What about colleges' business programs? So every college does have a business program for the most part, and again, Davis and Santa Barbara usually have a good business program, so in that case you want to consider those maybe here. Right. And another person mentions that like some schools have programs, but every school has its majors. So in this case, you want to look up what schools provide the major, but eventually you want to make it to the program itself, right? So kind of a two-step process. Like you don't have to do your major in that particular school, but you do have to do your program in a particular school. Just kind of food for thought. So if a teacher is teaching business, why wouldn't they open a business? You know, it's funny because some professors do. Like some professors are actually millionaires who are teaching more of a hobby. So I'll give you an example. One of my professors back in college was teaching a nonfiction course, and you're thinking like, well, why don't you publish a book then? And she did, and she actually made millions from it already. So a lot of them are just kind of like sharing their knowledge to other people, like that wealth of, right? professors don't just teach. A lot of them are doing a lot of extra stuff on the side, like writing their books or doing their second jobs or applying for their own sort of like researches and everything like that. So they're not just teaching, and that's why they're always like really busy. Any last questions before going into FAFSA, which is actually kind of short. So any last questions about college stuff? Going once, going twice. Sold. All right. If you have any questions, though, feel free to ask towards the end as well, because it's kind of like open floor at that point, right? But let's talk about the fun thing, FAFSA. I love this question every year because this is something that always scares people to fill out, but it's actually super simple and just kind of like direct for the most part. So what you got up here is the website for FAFSA. You're going to go there. You can see these two sections here. If you're completely new to FAFSA, you're going to click on this one over here. And if you are a returning user, you're going to click on this one. And the difference is this. When you first join college, you're going to be doing this one because you haven't done a FAFSA before. But you got to renew your FAFSA every single year. So if it's the second semester of the year, no worries, then you are good. But if you need to, or if you're jumping into your next year of college, right, then you have to click on this one to reset your FAFSA. And the reason being is this: they're judging you based off of your financial years. And so if you suddenly jumped from one year to another in terms of your financial status, you might get less money, right? So they're basically checking up on you to make sure that you fit the criteria. Because basically, think of it like this: it's like one big pot of money, and everyone takes from it what they need. But if you are more well off than someone else, they don't need as much, right? So they're going to check every year to see where you are on the FAFSA status here. So speaking of FAFSA, you got to make something called the FSA ID. It's not a big deal. Basically, just click on that before you make your FAFSA ID account. You do that real quick. Basically, you're going to make an account with, again, social security number, basic information like name, birthday, address, and stuff like that. And with that ID, you can now make your FAFSA account. So it's kind of like a two-step process. One is just to register you to the system, and the other one is just kind of like to update your paperwork and all that. I know there's a lot of paperwork to do, but just keep in mind it's not that bad. Just make it a consciousness. So things you need for doing your FAFSA. One, your basic information. So just know your name, know your birthday, stuff like that. Know your social security number. Funny. This is always going to come up. You're going to make a save key, a password that basically is universal once you keep doing it over and over. It's your password, basically, like your account password, right? So just keep that safe in mind. You're going to need two things that are different from what we mentioned before. Oh, well, more in detail now. Your parents' finance and also your finances, because all FAFSA is we're looking at how you're doing as a family unit, but also as an individual, and we're considering how much money you need then to, make education possible. So we're going to consider your parents' tax returns, and then we're going to consider your tax returns if you're working here. This is actually a very annoying thing about FAFSA. If you are working and you make more money as the student, right, then you would actually receive less money from FAFSA and so forth. So I'll give you a quick anecdote. So I have a friend named Johnny. His sister was working at Great America, and she was making, a pretty good amount there. But the problem is the more she made as she became promoted and stuff like that was that she didn't qualify for either FAFSA altogether, or she qualified for less, right? And sometimes, and this is the shitty part, it's kind of like welfare, right? Where you actually want to work less or make less money so you can get more from FAFSA because the payoff would be more. Think of it like this. Let's say you make $1,000, right? And FAFSA provides $2,000, so that's $2,000 total. But let's say you start making $1,500, cool. But FAFSA's only paying $1,000 now. So you're making $2,500. So it's actually better if you just made less money and you get the 3K before. So that's kind of a tricky thing. Just make sure you kind of like figure out the numbers and don't go beyond at a certain point. A quick question that comes up in the chat: do you recommend applying to multiple colleges at once? Yes, actually, because if you only apply for one and it doesn't work, then you are screwed. You know what I mean? So in this case, apply for all the ones that you're interested in. And even though sadly there is application fee for each college, you do want to kind of like, open your net to all the different places. I know college is one big gamble. FAFSA will look like this. Once you do all the paperwork, and it's going to be like pretty intuitive, right? It's going to be like step A, put in this information. Step B, put in this information. Once you're done with all that, they're going to tell you that about 7 to 10 days, just keep checking your email and everything like that. We'll let you know where you are in the process and the timeline and everything like that. We'll look at this one here because that's where you are, first-time employer. You're gonna receive your aid, and your school's basically going to contact you. They're going to be like, "Hey, FAFSA has given you this much. They're going to give you an offer, basically, and that will usually come in the form of an email, or you're going to go to the student finance office. Once you go there, they're going to be like, "Here is how much money you'll get," and that money is how much you'll get for the entire year, right? And you can redo it again, and then you're going to get money again. So it's kind of like a cycle over and over. In the second year, you're going to be in this category where you're just going to resubmit all the information as before and then apply for FAFSA again. Now, here's a common issue that happens a lot. Let's say that you have your own tax return or you're not working, whatever, but your parents don't have their tax return for various reasons. They didn't file, or there's nothing in data, or they're actually not citizens or whatever. There's a couple options for this here. Number one, let's say that your parents did file a tax return, but they just don't have it on hand. You can always access it with this function they have while you're doing your FAFSA, where they just directly pull, if you have all the information, like your social security number and everything like that, they'll just look for your IRS data and just plug it in. So in this case, if you have the physical, super easy because it's right in front of you, right? No questions asked. But if you don't have it on hand or is missing, then this is an option for you. If your parents are not citizens or don't live in the US, you can opt for an option called foreign country. So in this case, you wouldn't have a tax return because you're not paying taxes, and you don't have to worry about that then. Or if your parents do make below a minimum, there is a minimum actually where you don't have to file taxes because you're just making below that threshold, then all you need to do is provide a W-2, 1099, or pay stub. And I know these numbers look tricky, like the tax numbers, right? Like, oh, what is this? But it's basically your paycheck, like how much you're making. So just ask your parents, like, hey, do you have any paperwork that shows how much money you made over the year? Then, you know, that's what it is. So in this case, just ask them for like, hey, how much money did you make? Boom, they give it to you, and then later you're good to go. Someone said, this is all overwhelming. I know it is. And that's why it sucks to do it when you're like, you know, last minute for a senior year. But don't worry, like I'm giving you the front load first so that over the summer you can ask questions about various sections. But I guarantee you it's not as complicated. It's just a lot of busy work. You know what I mean? It's like doing a lot of homework that this is like, why can't I just say I'm going to this college and I want this scholarship and this FAFSA, you know? But otherwise, I know it looks like a lot, but it condenses down to pretty straightforward stuff. Oops. So this is all like very, very nuanced stuff that I'm not going to talk too much about, but otherwise, all I'm going to say is that FAFSA, again, is just going to average what you need and how much you should receive. You should wait about 7 to 10 days for it to process and to let you know when the money actually comes in. Use the money, you pay for what you need. It's not tracked. So basically, if you need to pay for rent, for example, go for it. If you need to pay for food, go for it. Anything that is needed for a school year, do it, right? That's what FAFSA is all about. So it varies vastly, and it looks something like this. Let me just change that, it's wrong. But this is how much you would get from FAFSA altogether. Let's say you're going to EVC. FAFSA would pay an average of $9,400. And that's a lot of money because remember, it's for the whole school year, right? But otherwise, if you look back to the previous slides about how much EVC costs, it was like what, like $1,400? So you have $8K to spend on whatever you need on the school year. From a new computer to textbooks to whatever, and anything else you can pocket too, right? So FAFSA is really, really beneficial. SJSU, for example, a semester is about 2.7-ish, so about like 5.4. So at the end of it, you have 10K to spend on books and so forth. So it really is beneficial to do FAFSA in all of its glory there. And even though like not everyone qualifies for FAFSA because like, you know, you're making too much money, right? You want to do it anyways because you might be missing out on a huge payoff in terms of your college experience. So just make sure that you apply for FAFSA when it opens. I think it's in October is when it opens. So for now, just think about it, but put it out of mind. But once October starts, you know, dedicate some time to finishing those papers. And we're going to do a workshop next school year in terms of like, you know, one day for actual college apps on site, one day actually for FAFSA. So I'm just giving you information right now, but we're going to work on it step by step too. Like it's not a blind, you know, experience. Question on FAFSA. I gave, again, a lot of information at once, but at this point, any questions on this process, how it works? Someone asked if you need drugs. I hope you mean prescription drugs. Do you need to pay them back? No, it's your money. It's basically money to help you loan free. So in this case, it's just like, hey, buddy, you are in need of money for success. Here's some money from federal assistance. Boom, there you go. I would also say this while we're on the subject of money. Try your best not to do loans in college. They will forever haunt you. If you were with us for the New York essay by Megan Daum about her student loans, that's one thing in life you cannot default on. And we keep talking about that and people meme about it, but it's true, where that is going to always haunt you forever, the student loans. And it's going to keep interest building, and it's going to be a pain in the ass and a bitch to pay off. The more you cannot do loans, the better. So do apply for FAFSA, do apply for scholarships, do not do loans if possible. How do they send the money to you for FAFSA? Basically, it's going to be direct deposit or check. So in this case, it's whatever you sign up for. So FAFSA throws this money using taxpayer dollars for us to pay them back when we pay our taxes after we graduate. Yeah, it's a circular, yeah. Student loans are loan sharks, and it's one big cycle. So even though it looks nice that you're receiving your FAFSA money, it's just basically perpetuating the game of education and making money. So, okay. Before we're going to PIQs, which is my last part of this whole big ass lecture, I know, sorry, it's a lot of information, I know, but let me just kind of like de-stress it and decontextualize it because it's not that much, right? So what do we cover? Number one, admissions. All you gotta do is just fill out information and just make sure you have the documents on hand to fill out, attend orientation, pick classes, boom, you're good. FAFSA, same thing. Make sure you have your parents' information on hand, social security number, fill out the forms, send it in, wait, boom, you're good. So really, it's just a lot of paperwork and waiting and stuff like that. But otherwise, it's nothing out of your skill set. You can do this. It's just that you want to make sure you do them step by step by step, right? Work on your applications first, work on your FAFSA second, and later, everything kind of falls in hand afterwards there. So just take a step at a time. Right now, just be conscious of it. I know it's summer and everything like that. We want to relax, but this is kind of the last summer for you to kind of make sure you're doing your work, because this is like the next big step right after high school. Okay, so this last step is exclusively to PIQs and common apps that are only for UCs and private colleges. So this is the extra step they want from you besides all the paperwork and all that. They're going to ask you to write a couple of short narratives about yourself. And I linked actually a few for you from students that have given it to me in the past. I didn't use recent ones from like 2020 because you know them, so it's kind of awkward to read their personal stories. But I linked a few that are from students from 2018 and let's see, 1, 2. I think you guys know Thomas. No, he went to MIT. I also put his in there as well. So these are ones that we worked together to kind of like refine everything like that. And then later we just kind of like, made sure that everything is set up. So those are the 3 I included. Actually, you might even know the other 2. I think you guys know Amanda because she was in charge of clubs and so forth back then. So Amanda Dome, I've also included hers. And then another one, I put V Lee, who's from 2018. She was, I forget if she was in any clubs or anything like that, but I also have hers as well. And I picked each one for a reason too. And the last one is actually a PIQ back from 2015, before the changes, but I put that one in as a good example actually for a common app essay. And that's from a student from EVHS when I used to teach there, from a student named Philip. So I'll talk about each one in a moment here. But otherwise, for PIQs, you are basically given 8 questions, links above here. And of the 8 questions, you're picking 4 to write a 350-word response maximum for each one. So in this case, if you do a little bit under 350, that's okay. But you want to kind of do as much as you can to kind of like, make the most bang for your buck to present yourself. Which question you choose is entirely up to you, but you want to pick the ones that are most like relevant to you, right? So one of the questions is like, I don't know, let's say like your favorite subject in school, right? If you don't generally have one, like you're good in school in terms of the subjects, but nothing like really stood out to you, and you don't have anything to write about that, then don't pick that one. Pick the ones that really stand out to you and the ones that you can answer most easily for. So in this case, I provide all the, few slides down, but I provide all the PIQs. They're all online as well, but if you want to access them all in one spot, then go ahead and use this PowerPoint as well. But let me just talk about what the PIQs are. they are narrative essays. So in 350 words, you gotta write something really compelling about yourself, your storytelling. You're making yourself look desirable and as an interesting person. Think of it as an interview, right? Even though you think it's something cliche about yourself, don't think of it like that. It's not about the content, it's about how you're writing it. They're judging you on your writing voice, your character, because if you're kind of like, 4.0 student, all that, but your writing kind of looks like a robot, then they don't want you necessarily because you don't seem like a person who is well-rounded or a person who is, very expressive. Like you can do the work, sure, but past that in a job sphere, you're probably going to collapse under pressure and stuff like that. So in this case, you want to sound like somebody who's in charge of their life and very conscious of everything else here. I'll say this too. With the SATs being gone, this is actually probably going to be a bigger deal now for the UC applications because this is probably going to reflect more of you past your grades and everything like that. Question real quick, but do the PIQ questions change over the years or are they always the same? They do often stay the same, but this whole like 350 words format is actually fairly new. It's actually changed in 2015, I believe. Philip's example was the last one of the old version, but otherwise their questions are pretty much the same, just that the process is a little bit different. So they're usually going to ask you the same general questions, but the amount has changed. So just food for thought. Things are always like malleable and ever changing, right? Oops. Things that work for the PIQs and just writing about yourself, they want to see you growing and overcoming difficulties. They want to see you serving the community. They want to see you, being a leader in multiple ways, not just like I'm the leader of this club, but even as a person who's pushing everybody. Like Amanda's PIQs were usually like, I wasn't the president of the club, but as the vice president, I pushed and I did a lot of extra work and I, stood out as a leader. So in this case, even if you weren't in a leadership position, just explaining something, doing it big, helps a lot. And it's all show not tell. Like if you're telling me that you're good at something, I don't buy it. You know what I mean? You gotta let me know you're good at something by just showing me the things you've done, the way you approached it. Like if you just tell me I was a good leader in my club, I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't see you lead your club. I need to see the things you've done. So for Amanda's, for example, she talked about raising money and just being a voice that oftentimes accepted opinions and gave her own opinions and whatever, right? So she displayed all the things that she did. And that's what you want to do for these PIQs. That's what works oftentimes. These are the questions that are provided. Again, you can look at them when you like to. And then later the Common App is pretty much the same thing. They want an essay from you, but it's a little bit nicer because it's just one essay. You picked one of 7 and it's 650 words tops. So, it's a little bit less writing, but remember, they ask you for a lot of extra stuff sometimes. So it's this plus maybe like 2 or 3 essays, which is not that fun. Whew. That was a lot of stuff. Now, any questions on PIQs, Common App, or at this point, any questions on anything we've gone over? And we're going to revisit this a few times, maybe over the summer. We're not going to have classes over the summer, but you're going to be doing this probably over the summer, so you have questions and stuff like that. But this is just, one day step into the big mountain in front of you. I talked about it in my final speech things where at the beginning of junior year, you start at the bottom of a mountain, right? Looking at all the things you have to do. Here's another mountain to climb. And we're at the base of it right now in terms of what to sign up for. So just keep that in mind. It's just looking up on top of the mountain. But when you're halfway there, it's less scary. Questions?
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
What happens if legitimately you feel untalented and that I don't feel like there's anything that really stands out?
Oh, nice. You sound like every college student or every student who's applying for UCs.
So what's the remedy?
No one thinks that they have a good story to tell. That's normal. So the remedy is just to write and just kind of trust in your good writing. That's it. That's all you can do. I'll look at the examples here. If everyone has a doc open for the UC PIQs, let me go over them each really quickly, maybe to kind of alleviate the problems. Do I see this? Okay. So hopefully this is displaying, but these are the PIQs I sent to you on the different prompts that they asked, but also different students altogether, right? So for Amanda's, she wrote about club leadership and how she kind of provided for this big ass show that, you know, paid off in the end. In this one, it was from V, who talked about her sort of dissociation and her sort of like detachment from life altogether, because she had immigrated from Vietnam to California, but also she had been to Massachusetts, East Coast, so she kept moving around, right? And it's all about adapting in this case here. In this one, this is Thomas's. This one's just about washing dishes, but he makes it into like this bigger allegory, or like this bigger sort of like extended metaphor in terms of like him as a person, right? And then later in Philip, he kind of talks about poverty and his own experiences. So they're all like nothing new. Like, to be frank, they're all like common stories that people experience and go through. But with each person, they were able to tell it in their own way. And I provided them each because I want you to consider the methods. In Amanda's, she wrote a very step-by-step detailed one. So in this case, as a college reader, I'm thinking like, oh, this person is really like organized, and they have like a very clear paragraph to paragraph, you know, build up on their story. In V's, her story was very narrative heavy. It was very like show not tell, super show not tell. A lot of it's implicit. A lot of it is like, you know, just getting a better feel for the person. Thomas's shows that he is very clever in terms of looking at how to take one concept of his life and turn it into a bigger symbol for his overall. And Philip does a really great job in terms of talking about how poverty is seen through the POV of a young person and from a student. So each person does it exceptionally well, and, you know, food for thought, right? So if you think you're cliche, don't worry. Everyone does. Any other questions on anything I've covered for college day in general? Cliche for the win? Yeah, like, I can't tell you how many people have written about, okay, don't be insulted by this. I'm not insulting anybody. I'm not like taking a jab at anybody, but a lot of people write about the first generation blank experience. Like, I'm the first generation Asian American. I'm the first generation Hispanic American for my family here. And that's a totally legitimate and big issue as a young person to go through. But that is, I want to even say 20% of all submissions, right? Just talking about that as a general theme. People have often written about it, but they do it in their own ways. So there's no worries. You write about your C in calculus? I don't know. What about that, though? That's my question. First generation white man? That could be satire. They might actually think you're clever then. Has anyone gotten anybody insulting the school? Not directly. So there are some satirical pieces in the past, but you don't want to be like, yeah, Berkeley, it'd be a fucking favor if I was in your school, because you guys are just a bunch of stuck up bitches. You know, you don't want to write like that. That's a little bit too much. But you wrote about your dad? Yeah, hey, you know, maybe it's a substance story. Like, you know, you meme about it, but there's actually a lot of things to talk about there. Person asks, is it better to avoid talking about Corona? Actually, this is very interesting, where UCs in the next year or two are actually opening a second prompt, like additional, I think it's optional, prompt, where in 250 words, they're going to ask you how Corona, the whole social distancing thing, has affected you as a student. So in that section there, it might even offer a little bit of like explanation for yourself. It might even kind of show off your writing a different way. So it's not bad to talk about coronavirus, but in your regular PIQs, maybe not more than one prompt. You know what I mean? Because like, my general tip for PIQs is if you write about the same story 4 times in a row, then it becomes too much. I'll give one example. Actually, Zoran brings up his dad, but I had a student for 2020, and she wrote 4 prompts, each one about her father and her despising of him. And I was like, okay, but your college is going to look at you and think like, all right, you hate your dad. What else? You know what I mean? Like, it becomes like a too redundant story. So you want to diversify a little bit. Any other questions about college overall? And you're free to ask about like during college as well, but that's maybe a different story too. You know what I mean? We go back to the college day thing.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
can you only submit 4 or can you submit all 8?
No, you can only submit 4.
Okay. Is there like you can only submit 4 or like you can submit 3?
Nope, it has to be 4. There's 4 sections. So basically, UC applications will be like this one big interface, and it's going to be step by step. You're going to finish one section, go back to another when you need to. But when we get to PIQs, unless all 4 are filled out, you cannot continue and finish. Any other questions? College is a long journey, someone wrote. That's not actually true. College goes by really fast. If you thought high school went by really fast for some of you, somebody thought like, God, give me out of hell, it's been forever, right? But for those of you who thought high school is fast, college is even faster. Like those semesters just breeze by. Oh, the journey to college? The journey to college, it's not long, it's just strenuous, right? So here, let me make a slide here for you guys to consider, just to kind of like make you not be overwhelmed, right? The next steps in terms of how to apply for college. So number 1, a couple things to do during the summer, right? Just think about majors you want to do. And you don't have to commit to them, but just having a more definitive major helps a lot in terms of setting everything up and getting a foot into your applications and all of that. So maybe just brainstorm a few majors you want to consider. Gather documents, for example, your social security number, parents' tax returns, stuff like that, just to make sure you have it on hand, right? Just ask first. Like you don't want to. I had one student. Whew, this is a big issue. It was like basically like way too close to the deadline for FAFSA, and they're like, how do you do this? And I was like, you're kind of late, but let's try to work on this. And then later, halfway into it, they're like, oh, my parents never filed a tax return. So we had to go through the entire process of figuring out how to do this. And just like one big issue. So just saying that was an issue. So number 1, think about major. Number 2, gather your documents. Number 3, start brainstorming schools into programs / majors. So if you're thinking about, I'll just give my example, right? Let's say I want to go to English, and by the way, you're not going to make money, but let's say you're brainstorming about schools that you will want to apply to, look into the programs, think about which ones offer what are they most known for, start looking at that. If you're going for UC / what do you call it, private schools, start on PIQs now, because, and Andre, you're here, I'll use your sister as an example. I don't know how many times I looked at Claire's PIQs. I think it is now in the 50s or 60 times. So, she was really intent on revising. So good on her. That was really, impressive that she wants to keep, working on them. But if you plan to do revisions constantly, then you got to start early, because you got to look at what you have first and what you got afterwards. Amanda, for example, was after school almost every day for like an hour or 2, just revising on her PIQs. So a lot of people who got into the schools they wanted to put in the work. Another question was, do you think it's a good idea to apply for different majors for corresponding schools? I would say no. Excuse me. Because it shows that you're indecisive. Sorry, I choked again. Goddamn. But they usually like people who have a very clear game plan. So in this case, you want to make sure you have either undecided, so you can actually have one in the future, or you go in with one in mind. And you can always switch, right? You can always switch your major. So in that spirit, just go in with one and then later reconsider afterwards. Another question is, what if each school is better for a certain major than others? So in this regard, this is why it's super important to kind of like figure out a major during the summer, because some schools are kind of, again, impacted, right? Some schools are like, no, you better know what you want because this is an impacted major. So in this case, those types of majors and those focuses, you want to make sure you have for certain. But there are some majors where they're kind of like, you can join whenever as long as you have a general plan because they're not impacted. Then that's fine. You know what I mean? Like you want to make sure that you look at what's impacted and what's not for each school. Each school will give you a list of which ones are. How much can PIQs make colleges overlook other aspects of the application? Good question. So I bring you back to Philip's story. So that's the fourth PIQ I provided on the list there. I'll give you the story. Philip was a senior, and Philip was very unmotivated throughout all the school. He didn't give a shit about anything, right? And in senior year, he started to get his stuff together. But by then, his GPA was pretty shot. He was bright. He was just really lazy here and there. And he did a lot of procrastinating and all that. But he was working his PIQ super hard. We were doing his PIQs for like 2 weeks straight, and at least like an hour or two every day, just like giving really harsh feedback and really like, reflective writing. And he went from not really thinking about college altogether, and he went to UC Santa Cruz at the end of it all. So even with a pretty low GPA and not too many notables throughout high school, with a very strong PIQ back then, he was able to make it to his school of choice there. So PIQs can really make a shift in terms of what they accept and don't accept. Especially now, I think, with the whole SAT taken out thing. And as you're brainstorming maybe more questions, the 4 steps at this point in terms of, summer-ish, right? Take a slow, just kind of do a few things in terms of what you should get started. Think about your major, gather your documents, start brainstorming schools, and then start on PIQs. That's it. That's really it. Like 4 steps in terms of like just general goals to keep in mind. And once you start tackling them, a step at a time, then you'll be way more ready end of summer / beginning of senior year. Another question is, should I do PIQs even though I plan to go SJSU? No, PIQs are only exclusive to UCs and for privates. I would say this though, I would actually say it's not a bad idea to even try a few anyways, because even though you might just be thinking, well, I'm going to go to a CSU and that's a very definitive plan, it's not a bad idea to just kind of keep your options open, right? Because you never really know. Have you ever been surprised on a student who did or did not get in a college? Not really, because like I said, it's one big gamble, right? There are some I'm not surprised in even the same regards of an AP, for example, because there are students who should have passed an AP, but didn't. Like, I keep bringing him back. Thomas, he got into MIT. He got a 2 in Lang. You know what I mean? Like, don't worry about it. So it's really sometimes just bad luck or not the right day or whatever. So I'm not surprised at anything at this point in terms of how schooling works. Effort pays off, but not everything is guaranteed. Any other questions on college altogether? Can I become a drug dealer when I grow up? Again, I hope it's pharmaceutical. I hope you're a pharmacist, not streets. No, bad. Actually, of all the people, I think CCA class of 2021 is the one that does not need drugs the most, because you guys act like you're on drugs half the time. So I'm just saying, any more, and the world cannot handle it. I produce drugs in my body. Okay. All right, guys. If you have no further questions, I'm going to put this the slideshow into the same place, the AP review stuff, so you can kind of access that throughout the entire summer and so forth. And if you have questions about college otherwise, feel free to keep asking. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be an ongoing process, and you're going to keep asking all throughout from now until like November, basically. Like, to be frank, it's not going to stop. So no worries. But if you want to stick around and ask me more questions, feel free. I'll stick around till like maybe like 3:30-ish. And then later, I'm going to go and eat. You don't have to drive the SAT essay drive. No. The drive is the same old AP review one that we've been doing the whole time. So if you just, I'll put it in right now. So if you just go into the place where I've been putting our presentations and everything, it should be there. It'll just be called it's called College Day. Boom, boom, bam. Okay, now it's in. Okay. Any last questions? I'll stick around for a little bit for another 10 minutes if you have questions, or just want to throw some thoughts in about life and everything that's happened in the last few days before the end of it all. You wish you had a mic? Go buy one. Oh, which movie? Good question. I think the last time I checked it, it was Tokyo Godfathers so far. But no, we're not watching Cats. If we're watching Cats, then I'm going to put you in the fucking breakout room. See you, Annie. Oh, what time's the movie? That's a good question, actually. I think I'll ask another survey once the choices are done. Peace, Devin. Once I see the biggest option, I'll ask where everyone is most at. So right now we're actually at Sicario as the most chosen one, but I only got like 22 votes, so just saying. What happens if you can't get into your dream school? I don't know how I can put this not harshly, but dream differently, because they're peace, Oren. Because the dream school is a nice goal to achieve, but you're going to have to realize that your goals change constantly through life. So even though people shoot for one school, for example, they're going to get to another school, they're going to adapt, they're going to still succeed. And that's that, you know what I mean? See, Julie? It sucks, but it is what it is. See, Jenny? Peace, Ivy. See, Elizabeth? See, Harriet? See, Hoey? All right, so I've got a small group here. We all got any questions still? Or are we still brainstorming anything? Or can I go consume a late, say Yun, the chosen one. PCN. You're gonna dream of being the average American under debt? Well, I'll just say this: you don't have to dream about that. You can just live that normally. That's pretty accessible for most people. Sad to say. How do you avoid debt? That is a very tricky question because sometimes that's almost unavoidable depending on just financial status and situations. But scholarships help. FAFSA helps, and any form of ways of cutting down money for college that's being like, for example, SJSU has a program called what's it called again? Oh, I can't remember now. But basically, it's another form of like reducing costs. But yeah, just anything that they offer, take. Move out of America, I think that's a good option too. Like America's education system is really broken in terms of costs. Australia's a good place to live. I don't see why not. It's actually kind of funny because Australia has its cons because it has a very, very extreme wildlife there and a very extreme like natural fight you're going to have. But otherwise, its system in place is pretty good. It's actually this. It's similarly diverse to America. Actually, a lot of people from various countries meet there. Canada's not a bad place. Just saying. You know, just another food for thought. It's kind of like, well, why would someone go through the whole struggles of like UCs and CSUs? See, Mohammed, the reason why is it's Bay Area, it's location, it's access, it's opportunities. So even though it's a bitch and a half to apply to all these things and have to pay for all that shit, it's more about like just being surrounded by a lot more options, if anything. So yeah, but people in the States don't have the same opportunities to. Um, like we spend a lot of money here, but we also make a lot of money fast here too. That's not true for everybody. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's kind of like Megan Dom's New York, right? Like you think you're doing well, and suddenly things go bad. So other states do have it nice in terms of economic costs, but they also don't have the same sort of like prosperities, possible access to it. Any final questions before I leave you to ponder existence and the struggles of college?
Oh, during the summer, Mr. Lin, will you be able to help us with revisions for PIQs?
Yeah, and that's kind of why I want to bring up as early as possible, because over the summer, it's just kind of like, keep sending me PIQs. I know I'll give you feedback and so forth. But feedback is going to be kind of harsh for PIQs, where I'm just going to be like crossing out lines and being like, hey, this is bad, rewrite. And you're going to have to take it, because even though I'm only giving you one perspective in terms of what to write and so forth, there are things like grammar you're going to have to accept as fact. There are things such as like, there's a difference between cliche content and cliche writing, right? So lines that you think sound good but have been overdone, I want to tell you cut that out. So just get used to a harsher feedback. We're gonna watch movies with you of the summer. I mean, I guess if people want to, that's fine. I just don't know what you guys want to watch necessarily. So I'll throw some options out there. All right, we all good, folks? Hello? Yes, question. Yes, go ahead. No, we our last session is actually going to be Thursday watching a movie, so it's totally optional in terms of whether you want to go to or not. But otherwise, from this point on, it's just kind of like one ongoing quote unquote class in terms of submitting PIQs to me, checking up on paperwork, checking up on applications, and so forth. So again, from this point on, it's just making sure that everything is ready for senior year. But otherwise, technically classes, the last day of class is tomorrow, actually. Even though school year ends on the 29th, the last official social distancing class day is tomorrow. So in this case, everything should be ending right about now. Well, school year went by fast because we didn't get to experience the last fourth or fifth of it. So when you do nothing, it really adds up, I will say. Well, you're not like doing the rituals and the routines. It feels like nothing happens quickly. There's that too. Who are we summoning? We're summoning the great college acceptance god. Sometimes he listens, sometimes he doesn't. Depends how much you sacrifice to him. Peace, Hugh, we.
Mr. Lin, can you give us your social security number as a student sample?
I can, but I won't.
All right, see you, Lin. Thank you.
Peace out, man. All right. I hope we're all good. We all good? Peace, peace, peace. I'll see you guys in the near future for movie day if you go, but otherwise, hope that was helpful.